and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, today's guest is Mike Malekoff. Mike's been on the podcast many, many times, and he's a wonderful, wonderful guest. In this episode, we talk about getting his boat ready for an extended cruise from Georgia to the Florida Keys. And this is after a 6 months where he had his boat on the hard. On the hard, Mike, means it's out of the water and it's up on land, hence the word on the hard. So, and and we also talk about the planning that goes into getting ready for such a cruise. In other words, where are we going to go? Where are we going to stop? All those types of things. So Mike is always a great guest on the podcast, and he shares his insights and experience willingly with us.
Bela, this sounds great. And yeah, I think listeners will really like this episode, and what you should look out for is, I think, helpful tips on safety, equipment, and something that I thought was kind of common sense, but I really learned a lot, and I think you will too, the importance of staying on the boat.
Yeah, exactly. Mike and I did kick that around a little while. So, hey, these are great points. Now let's get right into my discussion with Mike Malekoff. Hello, Mike. Welcome to the podcast
Bela.
again.
Hi, Bela. Great to be here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Hey, so you've been on the podcast several times, and to do a quick summary, you started in Lake Champlain, which is up in upstate New York, kind of on the border between Vermont and New York State. You had a Hunter 41, which is very similar to my boat, a Hunter 45, and
I have to
excuse me, a Hunter 44. Hunter 44.
You have me by 1 foot.
Yeah, and I think it's a pretend foot.
It is a pretend foot.
Yeah. But anyway, you started up there, you came down into the Atlantic Ocean, and eventually you ended up in the Bahamas, in the islands. And you guys spent several months there, and that was about a year ago. And that's in multiple podcast episodes that we've talked about in the past. You came back to the States, and a whole bunch of other stuff has happened. And now you're getting ready to go on a long cruise from Georgia, which is where you are now, down to the Florida Keys. So why don't you sort of start talking about what your plans are and your various different thoughts on that trip?
Sure, Bela. Great to be back here. And before we get started, how is the sailing up where you are now?
Well, if I look out my window, Mike, there is about 3 or 4 inches of snow. It was 15 degrees this morning as we record this on December 4th, and we're supposed to get 3 to 6 inches of snow tonight and tomorrow. So there is no sailing where I'm at.
I guess it was sort of a little nudge to you that it's 60 degrees here. I was working on the boat this morning. It's in the water. And as you insinuated, we're getting ready to head out on the boat, because our boating season is the opposite of your boating season, because now the weather is improving tremendously, meaning it's cooling off, and they said it's 65 degrees today and sunny here.
Yeah, and we're through hurricane season, so
yes.
That's also good.
Yes, as a matter of fact, for a lot of insurance with boats, November 1st is usually the opening of the season for boating down here, because many of the insurance companies consider hurricane season June 1st to November 1st. So it was interesting in working on the boat and turning on the electronics today is I could see an armada heading south on the ocean, going down to Florida and the Bahamas and the Caribbean. So the season is just beginning here. But no, I really enjoy being on your podcast. I love listening to your different stories and people. Hopefully my story is interesting to those that were relatively new to sailing and decided to start cruising and bought a big boat. And I was looking back, it's 3.5 years since we bought our Hunter, And it was during the pandemic that we decided that our vacation, instead of it being a hotel somewhere, but which you couldn't do, is we bought a boat and decided to go to the Bahamas for the winter. And we had several episodes talking to you about my naivete. Is that the correct word? Or being new to cruising in large boats. So it was quite an education for me in all the classes I took and passed offshore sailing courses and everything. And then we embarked on this winter trip to Bahamas. And it's interesting because we're sort of starting over again in the sense that we're getting ready for another trip. And I don't know if it's good or bad that I know a lot more now. So there's a lot more things to worry about in my head. But we went to the Bahamas. We came back, put the boat on the harbor. We're in Burlington. That's Vermont. We're down in Brunswick, Georgia, is where the boat is located at a large marina. And anybody that cruises is familiar with it because it's one of the big stopover places. So that's where we've kept our boat. It was on the harbor when we came back for the entire summer, the fall, going into the winter. And we had planned to use the last year, but we actually took a year off. And I spoke to you about this before the session, and I won't take up much time, but essentially I had health issues that had to be dealt with, specifically cancer. And I'm bringing it up only because it turned out to be prostate cancer. And because I had physicals and paid attention, they caught it very early. It was treatable, and I went through months of treatments and all these different things that I won't get into. But fortunately, I was lucky. But I have dear friends, two of them specifically, that lost their lives to prostate cancer because they didn't get checkups. So part of the message today is all the men, PSA test. When you get a physical, get a PSA test. It's a simple blood test. Make sure they do it because those numbers indicate whether there's anything going on. And we now know the older we get, it is very prevalent among older men to have prostate issues, and prostate cancer is one of them. So I'll leave it at that, but I've been lucky. The treatments went well. It's about a month, and I'm beginning to feel like human again. And now it's just get this boat ready again and going down the laundry list of things to do. And I'm sure you can comment on some of these, but first and foremost is safety. And, you know, it's interesting going back over all of the safety items to make sure the EPIRB works, because it's been sitting now for a year and testing it. We actually, here's something interesting. We're doing electronic flares. That's something new that came out. And it's sort of like, you know, we have these flares. You got to get new ones all the time. You know, the last thing you want on a boat is a fire. And that's exactly what flares are. So, you know, this, I guess, electronic flares, I don't know how long they've been around, and I don't know if you have them, but it was Black Friday, and I loaded up on a bunch of things the past week, and that was one of them. So do you have those by any chance? Or
I do, Mike. I think it was 2 years ago that I bought a couple for the boat, because you're right, the normal flares. So every boat has to have, I think it's 3 flares, and they have to be visible. And when people say flare, for those non-sailors listening, it's just like the flares on the side of the road when there's a car pulled over. It's a hot fire on the end of a stick, and it drips, and it's nasty stuff. And on a boat, they expire. I think like they have a shelf life of like 2 years or something. I may be wrong with that. So, and if the Coast Guard inspects your boat and your flares are expired, then they don't count. So you're constantly replacing them, and they're hard to get rid of. So you can't throw them in the trash because they're bad for the landfill, and So finally, people came out with some really good electronics, which is basically like a strobe light type of thing. And they got approved by the Coast Guard. And that's what I have on the boat. And it's great. It works just fine. And I think it has like a 10-year battery in it or something. And I've had one for 2 seasons now. So highly recommend it.
Well, that was one of our additions from the safety. Checking the life vests. We have the inflatable ones, and you have to check the cartridge. It's almost like we've started all over again from the beginning. It's one thing to just take your boat out like for a day trip where you're not going anywhere, or I think you always say, your trips are out and back the same day. That you don't really worry all the time because you're not that far, and if you need help, you're just getting pulled back. But when you're leaving the dock for weeks and months at a time and going offshore, I think you go to another level of safety. So we're going through all of this with the safety stuff, which my wife is helping, and she's going through. We have one of these med kits that we bought years ago that has everything imaginable in it, in case, as I always say, in case she hits me with something, have the right equipment to get me to the hospital.
All right.
Because as you know, that you can get pretty tense out there sometimes with your spouse.
Right. Hey, Mike, let me ask you, I don't remember the answer to this question. I do think you told me before. Do you have a life raft?
No, we do not. And it was a decision that we made with the fact that we were not going that far offshore, where, as you know, today, with being able to reach the Coast Guard, and we have all of the proper safety features within our boat, AVERB, we have Starlink, we've got the phones, and we know that the Coast Guard is close by. We actually, on that note, upped our dinghy for this year. And we always felt that if we had to go in the water, that we have the dinghy on our davits in the back that can be lowered very quickly, and we can jump in there, with our ditch bag. So it was a decision that we made in the sense that we felt that we were not going that far offshore. And I think our biggest offshore was crossing from the U.S. to the Bahamas, which was 40 some miles on a day when it was calmer than Lake Champlain. So, we're very, what I'll call very cautious sailors, that if there's anything that looks like it could be a bit gnarly out there, as a young person would say, we'll wait it out. So as you can appreciate, do not have a schedule on a sailboat.
Right. Excellent. And let me just ask a few more questions. I go down my mental list. Harnesses and jack lines?
Yes. We have both. And I think we talked about this. Of course, it's been a long time. I looked at this with jack lines. We actually have inside jack lines, if that's the proper term, where instead of running jack line all the way from the bow to the stern of the boat, one single line on the deck, we decided to run the line inside, which goes from the bow to the mast, along the railing into the cockpit. And we did this because the classes I took at Maryland Sailing School, which were really good, is one, if the jack line is on the deck, and as you know, there's so much stuff to trip over on the deck, the jack line was one more thing to trip over when it gets wet. Two is that if you go overboard with a regular jack line, you can end up in the water anyway, but you're attached to the boat. So instead of the boat leaving you, it drags you under and drowns you that way. So our lines are up higher so that there's no way you go overboard, and they're connected. in several locations. So you do have to switch hooks and stuff. But it's a long story. A long answer to that is yes, we have a jack line, but we do it internally.
Yeah. So one thing with respect to jack lines that I think is interesting to do, and that is rig your jack line like most people do. They have one on the port, they have one on starboard, right? They run from a bow cleat back to a stern cleat on both sides. Put your harness on, clip yourself in, and while you're at anchor and someone else is on the boat with you, fall overboard and see if you can get yourself back up onto the boat. And chances are you can't. I know I can't. I don't have enough strength to be able to. And our boats have a fair amount of freeboard, so it's a long way from the water up to the deck of the boat, and I can't do it. And if the boat's moving and that's stationary, right? You're at anchor, so you're not moving at 4.5 knots and the current against you and stuff. So yeah, I think that's really eye-opening. And I think what you do with jack lines is exactly the right way to do it. And your jack and your harness, you need to have 2 clips on your harness, right? One that goes to, I should say a total of 3 clips. One that goes to your life jacket, if you will, or your body harness, whatever you have. And the other 2 ends of the tether, I should use the right terminology. Your tether should have 3 attachment points. One that goes to your harness and 2 others that can go to jack line. And that way you can switch as you get to the mast. You have to disconnect from one and connect to another. But if you have 2 of them, you can always be connected into one, particularly if the weather's gnarly. So I agree with you 100%. That's the way to go.
Yeah, it's just something that we picked up along the way, and we saw other people, what I call long-term sailors, in the same setup where someone will say, well, but if you have to get up front and you have to switch your connections, it takes time. But you know what? If it takes an extra 30 seconds, I'm willing to risk that, because going overboard on the other jack line, as you said, if you try it with the boat just sitting there and you can't pull yourself up, moving
And
boat in heavy weather.
Yeah. When the jack lines are on deck from a bow cleat to a stern cleat on the same side of the boat, you will fall into the water.
Yes.
Even with your tether. And then I can't get back up out of the water, come up the side of the boat. So the idea is not to be able to fall overboard.
Well, I think I told you, what I thought was a great school was the Maryland School of Sailing, which is across from Annapolis in the Chesapeake Bay, and they're fairly well known. And I went there and took the offshore course. One of the first things they talked about is staying on the boat. And their point was, if you go over, you die. And they didn't want to hear anything else about turning the boat around, scooping you up, the jack lines. They said, you go over, you die. So keep that in mind. It's like falling off a cliff, as they say, no return. And they beat that into us. And this was one of the things that I picked up there. So safety is important. Now, the one thing we didn't get, and they're really expensive, and again, I didn't think we would need it because I am not going in that water, is the AIS, the small AIS systems that go on the life jackets. But they're like $400 or $500 for those. So I don't have that. And again, but we're not crossing oceans either. We're going to be, in this case, 3 to 5 miles offshore, if that. So
excellent. So other quick question for you with respect to safety equipment. How many handheld radios do you have?
Oh boy, we have one at the wheel that's connected, that's wired. We have one wired down below at the nav station, and then we have 2 other independent handheld radios.
Yeah, I didn't ask my question precisely. I guess the question I wanted to ask was, how many portable handheld radios do you have? And I think the answer is 2. Yeah.
We have 2.
Excellent.
We have.
Because I think one of the things is you got to keep one in the ditch bag,
Yes.
right? And that means, so if you still want to have
Well,
another one on the boat,
right.
because sometimes if you got a ditch, you're doing that fast. And the whole idea of a ditch bag is you're not throwing stuff in it. Everything
Yeah.
is already in there. You just grab
Yeah.
the bag. So you got to have one of those portable handheld radios in the ditch bag. The great thing about those radios is you can get a really good one now for $150 or less, and they're waterproof. So
Yes.
that technology has come a long way. Now they don't transmit as far as your VHF radio on the boat for two reasons.
Right.
The main one being is the antenna on your sailboat's 50 feet
Yes.
higher.
Right.
But
Right.
regardless, you got to have one in the ditch bag. Very nice.
Yeah, so we do. Of course, my wife says she doesn't like it in the sense that I keep misplacing them. so one of those little things that annoys my wife. But
Yeah.
so safety is definitely at the top of our list. So now, from all the safety equipment, we moved down to, well, how does that affect the boat itself? And I've been, for the past 4 weeks, I've been working on the engine and the generator. And for good or bad now, I don't need a mechanic to do the work anymore. That I have watched and learned over the past couple of years, 2-3 years, that I can do the basic maintenance now on the engine. Not quite as fast, a little bit of swearing now and then, but I've actually done the maintenance where I've changed the fuel filters, some of the lines with the fuel filters. I changed the impellers myself on the boats, changed the oil, checked the levels, the water in the system,
Coolant, the
increase.
coolant level.
Coolant, yeah, the coolant. So I've been able to do that, and just going over everything for all of the hoses and everything, and checking the connections and making sure they're tight. It's a lot of work to do that, but boy, I'll tell you, it saves a lot of money, because one thing you learn quickly with a large boat, the mechanics and electricians are not cheap. So, but at our marina, we have a very good dry dock. And the one thing I am doing is I did make an appointment to have the mechanic and electrician come over and see what I did. So in other words, I want somebody, a professional, to look at what I've done, how I've changed things or fixed things, as just an extra pair of eyes to say, oh, did you check this? So I am having, I felt that was worth the couple of hours
Yeah.
of work.
Yeah,
And
very nice.
And the stuffing box.
Yeah, I think one of the good things about being able to do those things yourself is that if you're out at sea and something happens, you sort of have an idea of knowing where to look, right? If you start getting water in your boat and you've tightened all of the seacocks, and you know where all the seacocks are, and you know where the hoses go, where the end from the seacock is and where the other end of the hose goes, you can check that stuff really quickly. If you're trying to figure that out, in the dark, in a rolling sea for the first time, that's really tough. So I think this is one of those places where knowledge also increases your level of safety, because you can respond to situations quickly, and you're well prepared. And I know I've said this before. One of my early bosses said to me, Bela, it's amazing how lucky you are when you're well prepared.
Yes.
And there's a lot of truth to that statement. So I'm all for doing as many things on your boat as you can, and understanding where the various different connections are, where the various points of failure are, so that if something happens and you're 8 hours away from a marina and you can't run your motor until you figure out what's going on with it. That's a good thing to know.
Yeah, it's I can troubleshoot things at least, and I have a rough idea as to how the whole boat functions and where things are. You know, I mentioned briefly just the stuffing box
Right.
as open something, you know, and it was like I was afraid to touch that thing. And for the people that don't know sailing, that's the connection where your shaft goes through the boat to the propeller. And because it goes through the shaft, it needs a seal there to keep the water from coming through, and it's called the stuffing box. And there's ways to adjust it, and there are several different types. And I have the old style type, which just has that mesh in there, and you basically have two rings, tighten and loosen to adjust it. And the stuffing box, which I learned early on, don't get scared when it's dripping, because you want it to drip, because that's what keeps the heat down on the shaft as it goes through your hull of the boat.
Right. Right.
So,
Well, very good. So it sounds like you've been diligently going through the boat and
yes.
sort of getting it commissioned after it's been on the hard for a while. What other things have you been focusing on?
You know, I think I said before, my list is 2 pages long, and a lot of it is just little things. You know, one of the things I've learned with getting ready to go somewhere, you're never going to get to everything on your list. So you have to prioritize. So I'm kind of looking at the things that keep me afloat as the most important and keep me safe, and things like the grill that needs to be remounted on the back of the boat, that I can do later on. Now, of course, staying in the U.S. this time, so I don't have to worry about flags and passports and stuff. But, you know, that was a whole thing my wife took care of, which I don't know if you've been following what's been going on in the Bahamas, but getting the permits this year in the Bahamas has been a free-for-all. That they've changed how much and how long you can stay and where you can go, and you know, that's like a whole other headache to worry about. But I'm also doing things with the water system, making sure the hot water heater works, the AC, you know, because we, as you know, we both have air conditioning and heaters on our boat. One of the things I haven't done yet that was highly recommended, you don't have to worry about this, running a fluid through your air conditioning lines to get all of the small crustaceans that end up in those lines for some reason. And I haven't done that yet, and I won't go into the details, but it's running this fluid through that clears out all the little mollusks and stuff, because I'm in warm water now, and I'm in warm salt water, and it's amazing what lives in water that is warm and salt. I literally have the bottom of my boat scraped once a month, and it isn't cheap, because the growth is so fantastic, like what ends up on the bottom of the boat. Now it's cooled off a bit down here, so they said it shouldn't be as bad now the next couple months. But during the summer, it was like everybody on my finger. The divers come in and they do our entire finger, because everybody wants their boat cleaned off, because if you let it go, it's just, first of all, as you know, if you go out with your bottom a mess, it slows you down, but it also gets into the through holes, it gets into the bow thrusters, into your prop and everything, and it affects the boat performance. So easier to clean it once a month than to try and do it, you know, once, and it's just a nightmare. So that's one of the other things. Spare parts is another thing that I've learned about. So I have an extra water pump, because when the water pump goes, you have no water, even though I have a water maker. So it was spare water pumps, spare the heads, spare motor for that, because I've already done one. So I'm an expert at fixing toilets now on a boat. And that was always one of the things my wife always said when we first bought the boat. She wanted two heads because she says, if we only have one and it breaks, I'm not using a bucket. So,
Yes.
so that's how we ended up with a 44-foot boat, because once you get over 40 feet, they generally will have two heads.
Yep.
So, and then the other things, other small things, the windlass, as you know, they get crudted up mercifully with dirt and sand and everything. So I'm going to service that, and mine leaks. And I don't know if you have that problem with yours, but one of the bad designs on our Hunter boat is where the windlass is mounted on that little platform in your locker. It leans back. It's angled back instead of forward. So the water sits on that thing, and then the water can go over the sides of the windlass into the windlass, and my seals in there have deteriorated, and then it leaks not down into the locker, it leaks into the forward bed, where it literally would drip on your head. So
okay.
I am going to replace the seals, and I just haven't gotten to that yet, and then service that. And then also service the winches. Have you done the winches on your boat?
I have not. I have not serviced the winches. The previous owner did. At least he had a record in his maintenance book that I inherited with the boat, and that he did it like the season before we bought the boat. And I haven't serviced them. I will say that my windlass is slightly different than yours, in that they must have fixed the pitch because I don't have water sitting there. And so I actually have a head in the very forward part of the bow.
Oh,
so there's a head
different
there. Yeah. So there's a head there with a shower. And then in front of that is one of my water tanks. And in front of that is the anchor locker. So my windlass would actually drip into where my water tank is, which would then go into the bilge pretty easily, right? Because my forward cabin is actually a Pullman. So it's it's on one side of the boat.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yes.
The bow's
so
laid out a little bit different. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because then yours is completely different, because mine has the full suite in the front, where, the bed is the furthest thing toward the bow, that
Right.
goes toward the point. And then I have a full shower and head and everything, that's on the other side of the bed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
No,
yeah. So I have the suite in the front and the suite in the back, which is what my wife preferred. So we have two completely separate living areas.
Yeah, ours is
the
a
boat.
suite. So there's a a queen size bed, but it's on one side of the boat. It's on the port side, and then on the starboard side is a sink and a vanity.
Right.
And then in front, in the very forward part of the bow, is where the toilet and the full shower are.
Yeah.
So it's
so
just
yeah, you
a
will,
different layout.
yeah. So you wouldn't have that problem that I do. But that's the other thing that I'm dealing with. And just planning is that I've been going over the whole route. Now, fortunately, we've done the route down the coast all the way down to Miami before crossing to the Bahamas. So we know the marinas, we know where we want to stop, we know how long it takes. And we've been I've actually made reservations already, because, once January 1st gets here, it really is difficult. So with marinas. So I was sort of Johnny on the spot and called places that we have been at before to sort of set up a time. There's always flexibility, because boats, as you know, you're never on a perfect schedule. And then I've actually secured a marina, a safe harbor marina in Marathon down in the Keys for a month. So
Nice.
that's halfway down. That'll be our main base of operation, so that we can always run back there in case of bad weather, but we can go south to the full Keys, or north to Isla Mirada and that area. So that's basically our plan. And, I've had to make all those arrangements. So, which takes a while, but it's, as they say, a sailboat or a cruising boat isn't a vacation, it's an adventure. And, we're preparing for this adventure. I think my wife's a little more apprehensive this time because now she knows too much as well. And, when we left Vermont, we had our issues. We like you said, it's being very well prepared to minimize the issues because you're going to have issues. Boats break and things happen. And I think we're much better prepared this time. But now the problem is we know what could happen. And I think I told you the one story where we thought we were leaking. We were in Charleston and we couldn't figure out where the leaks were, but we could hear the buzzing. And I think I told you the whole story that finally we saw a diver and he says, "Oh, that's the shrimp on the bottom of your boat eating."
Right.
So we spent 4 hours trying to find the leak in the boat. And yet there's no water coming in, but we heard this leaking sound and it turned out it was shrimp. So that wasn't covered in my sailing courses.
Right. Yeah. Well, you have to take a sailing course in Florida to have that covered.
Yes, I guess that was probably my problem.
Yeah. So do you use any particular resources for sort of planning your route down from, Georgia down to the Keys?
Wait.
Okay. So not everyone watches video. So,
but that's the waterway guide that I just held in front of the camera for Bela. You know what? I'm online all the, you can't be online. And I'll tell you what, YouTube videos are, all I have to do is put sailing the Florida Keys. And all of a sudden, all these people, pop up as to what they're doing and where they're going. I use all the what I'll call the electronic stuff that's available, for navigation and stuff, where the marinas are, and that's basically it. Is just doing a lot of reading and. As I said, the YouTube videos are great because, you can actually see the places that you're going to go. So, but for the most part, we do know the Florida coast now because we've been down it once and back and everything measured out because you have to know your distances and how far you can go. And we're day sailors also. Now we have done overnight where it was required or necessary to get to points, and I don't mind an overnight at all. I can go 24, 48 hours without sleep, but for the most part, we're not on a hard schedule. So if we don't have to go overnight, why bother? We go,
right.
We'd go our 40 to 50 plus miles a day. And we know where to head in, and we're either getting a mooring ball, anchoring, or a marina, and
Right.
just depends on what's available.
So when you look at a marina, right, you have the waterway guide, you have the internet. When you look at picking a marina, what's kind of your criteria for picking a marina?
I'd say that it's a good question. I have to think a little bit about. I would say one is how accessible it is, because as you have a large boat, and getting to some of these marinas can be tricky. Some of them it can be shallow getting into the entrance of some of these marinas. It can be tight in some of these marinas with a lot of fairways and fingers and stuff like that. Primarily what I look at is I look at the reviews. And I like to see what others say, because what I'm looking for most of the time, now, like I said, we're going to stay at a marina down in the Keys. I have it picked out. It's Safe Harbor. I know who they are. And I feel very comfortable. They're a first-class operation there. But I'm generally looking at a nighttime stop, 1, maybe 2 nights. So what I want is I want to know that the docks are in good shape, that there's water there, that I can pump out there, that the electric stuff works and isn't going to electrocute me or the boat. The cleats and everything, when you go in, that the bumpers are actually rubber and they're not broken cement or wood that can scratch up the side of the hull. So I kind of look for all of that, and a lot of it I get just from the reviews that I read about the marinas. And the ones where people say, wow, it's beautiful, they've got a pool, the service there is great, they meet you at the dock, and price. I can say we're lucky in the sense that I don't mind paying an extra $1 a foot or so for the service, as opposed to skimping and maybe going to the place where the services aren't so good. Because to me, one of the things that bothered me on our first big trip was I wasn't as selective, and I'd pick a marina out because it was in a good stop, and meaning the distance. And then it's like, oh, I need to pump out. Oh, well, that's not working. Well, what do you mean it's not working? It says here, and when I called, well, we've had some problems with it. Or the electricity is finicky, so I wouldn't suggest plugging in. Well,
Right.
isn't that what I'm paying for? Type of thing.
Right.
So I've become more selective, and from our first trip, I'm more familiar with where the good marinas are and stuff.
Right.
And there's some places that we just Vero Beach is one of them in Florida, and it's interesting. We didn't know what to expect when we got there, but it's such a good marina that the sailors call it Velcro Beach, because people come in there and don't want to leave because the marina is very good. It's in a great secure place, and they have mooring balls, so it's pretty cheap, and it's very close to the beach. And the city runs a bus to the marina, and it goes to the supermarkets, it goes downtown. So it's like you don't need a car or have to worry about getting a cab.
Yeah.
So it's those type of things that we've just learned because we've been sailing and cruising.
Yeah.
But mostly recommendations.
So let me ask you another question. When you go on these trips, when you provision the boat, what's your sort of, at least from a plan perspective, I'm looking for a place to stop where I can provision. Is that every 5 days, every 10 days, every 3 days? What sort of do you use for planning purposes?
Well, that's also a good question, and I'll have to think. This time it won't be bad because we're staying in the States. So we know there are supermarkets. When we provisioned for the Bahamas, it was, you will not find food. And as anybody that goes to the Bahamas knows, the price of food over there is double, triple what it is in the States. It's hard to get fresh vegetables, especially meats. And actually, we bought a Dometic fridge freezer extra. We have a fridge and a freezer on our boat. We bought an extra one and packed it filled with meats, so that our whole time in the Bahamas, we never had to really provision much. We go to the supermarket to get perishables, but as far as meats, we didn't have to. And it would scare my wife when she'd open this freezer, this little tiny, I don't even call them supermarkets, and it's got pig's feet in there and chicken claws, and so we provision for the long term on the trips. And it's just cheaper because we'll go to Costco and buy a bunch of chicken and fish and beef and stuff and load up the freezer, and we're good for a month or two. And we also eat out. So that would be the other thing, is that we're not opposed that when we get to a place, if the marina has a good restaurant, or in some cases we know people that we're going to stop and visit, and we go out to restaurants. So
Right.
But my wife, I will say, she's great. She does all the food provisioning. So, because then you get into the seasoning, the little things that you may not think about until you're out there, like, oh, we forgot a can opener, that that type of thing. So she's really, with getting the canned goods, pastas, things that, don't perish, aren't perishable. But on the
Right.
other hand, she also packs everything because you don't want cardboard on a boat. And maybe you could tell everybody why you don't want cardboard on a boat. So she takes all the packaging and removes it all, and it's all in,
Yeah.
sealed containers.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. So cardboard on a boat is bad because little nasty creatures like bugs and cockroaches and cockroach larvae and eggs can live in cardboard. And you get cockroaches on your boat. You think they're hard to get rid of in your house. They're even harder to get rid of on your boat. But, as you were talking about provisioning and things and stopping at marinas, one of the things that I really appreciate about sailing on the East Coast of the United States, and when I think about the East Coast, it's pretty much from, Maine all the way down to Galveston, Texas, including the Gulf Shore, is that all of these services are convenient. It's a convenient and easy place to sail. Almost every marina, every place you stop, you can, if you have to, you can get an Uber to go someplace. There's probably a West Marine that's not too far away. And if it's far away, you can, order something on Amazon. And by the time you get to the marina, your order will be at the marina. You can pump out, you can get good fuel that's clean. If something breaks and you can't repair it, you can find a marina that's got a reasonable mechanic. It's just an easy and convenient place, and a comfortable place to sail and cruise. And I know for me, that sort of lowers the anxiety level. If I'm going to a place and I know, well, they're not going to have a lot of food here, or you can't get fuel there because the fuel's been known to be dirty and it will clog your fuel filters or whatever, that for me increases my anxiety level. So things that I can do to lower my anxiety level are always good. And that's one of the things I really like about the East Coast. And it's really easy. You can go outside, you can go inside on the ICW.
Right.
There's just a lot of flexibility. And I remember there was a couple that was at our marina for the first 2 years we were there. And they lived in Florida, and they came up north every year. It was just a husband and wife. And when they would do the trip up the coast, coming north and and also going south, they would basically plan the trip in 4-hour blocks. So they would, just sail or motor for 4 hours, and maybe some days it was 5, other days it was 3, but they took a nice, relaxing trip down. And if they had to park someplace for 2 or 3 days because of weather, they'd park someplace for 2 or 3 days. And that's a really sort of nice way of doing it, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And, we're fortunate enough. I know that, my wife and I are sort of retired. So we do have the time and the resources where, the thing with the boat, as they always say, don't have a schedule. Because if you have to be somewhere by a certain time and date and you have to rush, that's when things can go south on you. And half the enjoyment of the sailing is taking your time, that you're not sitting there with the clock and watching the time. That, as I said to you, when we traveled and we were trying to go to place, but it wasn't like we had to be somewhere on a certain day. But, we planned comfortably. 40 miles we felt was fairly reasonable, where we didn't have to leave dark early, and we were pulling into a place at night, because that is also something that you're familiar with. And when you're not familiar with certain areas, you don't want to be pulling in after dark. That's another trouble thing. You be pulling in early enough so that you take your time, you can anchor, get to the marina, you can relax, take a shower, whatever. But you're not running where you're getting up at 4 a.m, you leave and you're still sailing at 6 p.m. So, we generally sort of try to figure out where we're sailing, the 5 to 6 hours a day. I say it because it can be tiring. And as you mentioned, you can go inside or outside, which is a whole nother experience. Is that when we left Lake Champlain, we were anxious about the outside, but you're safe on the inside. Well, we've now turned that around where I feel more safe on the outside, because once I'm out there and I turn on the autopilot, just sit back and relax and don't worry about anything. When you're traveling on the ICW, and I have the engine off and the sails up. On the ICW, I'm motoring and I'm worrying about every little turn, not hitting jet skis, the freighter that's in that channel, whatever it is, it's busy. It's like driving on the highway, is that you have to be alert, every minute. You have to be behind the wheel to slow down or speed up or to avoid grounding. Where, I'm more comfortable. And I said to my wife when we were sailing, I'm looking for every opportunity to get outside, go down whatever it is, 40 or 50, 60 miles, and then went and we anchor right there to get ready to go out again and avoid actually the ICW. Especially one of the other experiences, you don't want to be in a sailboat on the ICW south Fort Lauderdale in that area, because bridges are like every mile, like 50 bridges. And some of them are timed on the quarter hour. Others are controlled by, hailing the bridge. But boy, you talk about a lot of time sitting, watching and waiting for a bridge to go up or come down. And then everybody's trying to get through, and the traffic. And then wherever you are with a bridge, the jet skis are. And they're just annoying.
Yeah. Yeah. The one other comment I was going to say, and someone else, another guest on the podcast mentioned this, because that's what they do, is they often, because they're not retired like you and I, so they have they have constraints in their schedule. So you can go up and down the East Coast and enjoy all this sailing, and you can go out for a week, go as far south as you can in a week, park your boat someplace for a couple of weeks, and then come back, get on your boat and sail south for another week or two, and then park your boat someplace. So you can do it in chunks. It does not need to be a sort of continuous trip.
No, you're right. And as a matter of fact, when we left Vermont and went south, we had some obligations to deal with. And we actually left our boat in North Carolina for a month. And we had to fly back to Vermont for some family stuff. And then we also packed up and started moving stuff south in our car. So we were off the boat for a month, then got back on the boat, continued our trip. And then we got farther south, and I forget where it was. We had to take another week or 2 week break to take care of something, and left the boat. And then went back to it. But yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly that the fun of the East Coast, as opposed to West Coast sailing, which is a lot tougher, is you can virtually stop anywhere. And again, if you're anxious about whatever it might be or the weather, you just stay on the ICW, because you can literally almost go from, New York City all the way down to Florida and around inland.
Right.
And other than a couple of exceptions based on the type of boat you have, where you might have to go outside, it's not that long a trip outside.
Yeah. There's a high density of marinas and services and inlets to go in and out. So you can do it piecemeal, you can do it continuous. You can mix it up sort of however you want. And I think that's one of the really neat things about, and it's a couple thousand miles, right?
Yeah.
So of coastline there, from Maine down to Texas, that you can do that in. So that's great. Hey, Mike, we've been chatting for almost an hour here. So I want to start wrapping things up and maybe have you back again once you've sort of started your trip, maybe do another check-in, at the end of January or February when you're in a good spot, and talk about how things went. But before we do that, is there anything else that you wanted to chat about before we sign off?
Oh, actually, I think it was the last segment we talked about is just the enjoyment of sailing on the East Coast. And hey, that's what brought me to your podcast years ago was, oh my gosh, here's the guy talking about sailing up in New England, because most podcasts are down in the Caribbean with the girls, and you know how those podcasts are. And where yours was talking about what we were trying to learn about is we brought this big boat to Lake Champlain with the idea we were going to sail it to the Bahamas. And as it turned out, as I said, it can be a lot of fun, and I do enjoy working on the boat. It sort of like takes my mind off of other things, and I find it kind of excited. Like today, I called my wife. I said, I changed the impeller on the main engine all by myself and was able to get it out and get a new one in there. And she goes, I really don't care. But it was an accomplishment for me, because it's something that you need to check and maintain. But yeah, no, I think once you get sucked into the sailing lifestyle, and it takes you away from all the things that you worry about day in and day out. So
Absolutely.
and it's easy on and now it's even easier for us because we're starting down in southern Georgia.
Yeah. So, hey, Mike, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I always enjoy our conversations, and I hope we can connect again at the appropriate times. Drop me an email, and we'll have you on again to give us a report on what your trip was like from Georgia down to the Keys.
Yeah, no, I definitely enjoy it. And, I've always said to you, hopefully what we talk about helps encourage others to maybe either get involved or do more with their sailboat than just day sailing. Is that, taking a trip or a vacation on your boat is doable. Because if I could do it at my age, I was not a big sailor growing up, but took it up later in life. If I can do it, anybody can. And it's just in the investment of time and energy, and I dare say money, depending on the size of your boat. But it's definitely been something that we've enjoyed. So and I've enjoyed talking with you, and because you have the same boat as I do, except for that 1 foot that we'll have to figure out where it is. You've been a big help because you're familiar, we're familiar with each other's boats and how it functions. So thank you very much.
Yep. Have a great day, Mike. Thank you.
You too. Bye, Bela.
Cool interview, Bela. And first, great to hear that Mike's health is in good shape. And I can't emphasize more or agree with more Mike's recommendation about getting regular checkups, testing for cancer and other diseases that maybe you have a genetic proclivity for. But secondly, great also to hear about Mike's prep for his next big trip. And from what you two were discussing, I think there's a lot going on. What do you think are the key points that are relevant for anyone preparing for an extended trip, and maybe versus those that are specific to Mike's itinerary? I think these are a lot of really great general things, weren't they?
Yeah, they are general, but they're important. So when you're taking a trip, multi-day trip, Mike's is multi-months, it takes planning. And, you need to think about, so how many hours a day do you plan on being on the move, whether you're sailing or motoring? So you need to sort of think about that. What works for you? For some people, they want to be moving all the time. So they want to get to where they're going quickly. So they want to sail 24 hours a day and until they get there. Other people want to do 2 or 3 or 4 hours a day, take a very relaxed way of going about it. So you got to think about what works for you. And you need to think about where you're going to stop. So if we're going to stop, are we going to anchor? Are we going to try to pick up a mooring? Are we going to try to stay at a marina? Some of those require reservations, possibly. Others, like if you're going to anchor, you need to kind of scope out on the charts where the best places to anchor are. Read the comments by others. Most anchorages are protected when the wind is blowing from one or two directions, but almost every anchorage I've ever been into is exposed when the wind is from a particular direction. And so you got to look at the winds. So how's the wind going to blow this evening? Is it going to blow strong, or is it going to be like many evenings, the wind just kind of dies down? So you got to take all those things into account. So that's really important. You need to think about provisioning. I have a freezer and a refrigerator on the boat, and I can take about a week's worth of food maybe. But after that, I got to stop and buy food. And if I want fresh produce, I got to stop for that kind of stuff. And so you got to think about, okay, I want to stop someplace where it's pretty close to a grocery store or a supermarket. That's not true everywhere. There are parts of the East Coast where you're out, particularly in ICW, you're out in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing that you're going to be able to pick up from the grocery store. Other places, it's a 5-minute walk to the grocery store. You got to think about fuel. You got to think about pumping out your holding tanks. So all of those things kind of go into this sort of complicated equation of sort of planning a trip. You got to think about, am I going to do this on the inside, meaning down the ICW, or am I going to go on the outside, meaning out in the ocean? Or is it some combination thereof? If you do want to go outside, you got to think about where you're going to make that turn, that left-hand turn to go out into the ocean. There are various different inlets. Some inlets are big and wide, and they're very navigable. Other inlets have some really strong currents. And you can, if you want to see some of these, you can look on YouTube and you can see how nasty some of these inlets will get, particularly when the current is flowing in one direction and the wind is blowing in the opposite direction. You get some really big waves. So you got to kind of think about that, because you got to time it the right way. The other interesting thing is, if you want to stay on the ICW, once you get about the second southern half of Florida, you get to the southern half of Florida, I should say, there's lots and lots of bridges. And some of these bridges open on demand, meaning when you get there, they'll open the bridge. Other bridges open every hour or once an hour on the hour. So, your timing gets to be important, because if you show up there 5 minutes after the bridge closed, you're going to hang around for 50 minutes until the bridge opens again. So that's a consideration. So there's a lot of things that go into this. The beautiful thing is, Mike and I talked about it, there's various different books and resources to help you plan this. I'm a planner. So I like to sort of think through all these things, know where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do, and how I'm going to do it.
Cool. Kind of the next point that really struck me is, I love the idea that Mike was doing a lot of the maintenance work on his own. And so he learned about his boat. And then after he did that work, he would have a mechanic and an electrician come to check the work and maybe to show him some tips, or to kind of give him a professional overview of kind of what he did. And I thought that was really cool. But where do you draw the line between, like, Bela, what you would tackle, I mean, even with your engineering background and lots of experience, versus when would you call in a mechanic or an electrician?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. And I struggle with where that should be. Some of it is, quite honestly, I trade time for money, right? If I have a finite amount of time, then it's a project that might take me 3 or 4 days. I can hire somebody and it'll be done in half a day. But here's how I think about it globally. This is like hiking the Appalachian Trail. You're on your own. You have to sort of be self-sufficient. And there are times when calling an expert fundamentally only works when you're at the dock. If I'm out and I'm sailing or I'm motoring and something breaks, I got to figure out how to fix it. So what I find is that doing a lot of maintenance and sort of repairs on your boat while you're at the safety of the dock, you become very knowledgeable about your boat and where things are and sort of how they work. So that when something does break and you're out on your own, you have an idea of how to fix it. Or is this really bad and I need to call somebody to tow me in because I'm not going to be able to fix it. So it kind of gives you that kind of knowledge that I think is really important. You need to be sort of self-sufficient, I think, to sort of do any type of extended cruising. And quite honestly, I sort of get a fair amount of satisfaction from fixing things and knowing I can fix things. The other thing that I thought was sort of interesting as Mike was talking about it, sort of the differences between keeping a boat on the hard up north, where I keep my boat, it's out of the water right now, versus down south. You know, Mike has to deal with humidity down south when his boat's up on the hard and stuff gets mildewy inside the boat, etc. I need to deal with things freezing on the boat. So I need to winterize things a little bit differently. He needs to worry about hurricanes. I need to worry about snow accumulating on the boat, right? We both need to worry about birds and hornets and various different other critters taking up residence in various different parts of the boat. I remember one year I was rolling out my sail for the first time, and there's all these little branches and straw falling out of the boom. I go, what's that? Well, it turns out there was a bird's nest up in there. And, you know, there's a lot of little nooks and crannies on a boat when it's just sitting someplace stationary that the various different critters and animals sort of like to take up residence. So that's sort of a couple of thoughts that I thought were worthwhile mentioning again, based on the conversation we had.
Yeah, really cool, Bela. And I learned a lot as well. Last point. This is probably the last time you and I will talk in 2024. Not sure when the listeners will be checking this out, but what are your sailing goals for 2025? Is there anything specific?
Well, if some listeners might recall, last fall of 2024, my mainsail ripped, and back on the leech, the tail end of the sail, and I took it into Thurston Sails in Rhode Island, and we decided that the sails were too far gone to really fix reliably. So I've got new sails on order. So I'm excited about new sails. I'm excited about how they'll perform, and I'm excited about hopefully how easy they will be to sort of put away and take out every time. On my boat, I have a sail, a roller furling mainsail, which means it rolls up into the mast. And my existing sail was it's the original sails for the boat. And it's a 2009 boat. So they were pretty stretched out and baggy. And when those things get stretched out and baggy, they don't roll up very well. So the new sail should be nice. So that's sort of one big thing I'm looking forward to, one big improvement. And we always have what we call Camp Paradox, which is when my older granddaughters, who will be 11 and 9 next summer, come spend a week with us. So each year they come, we get a little braver, and we do some more extended trips. So that's always a lot of fun. So those are the things that sort of are rattling around in my brain. We do not have any specific trips planned, but we'll see.
Cool. That sounds great, Bela. What do you think? Time to wrap this one up?
I do, Mike. Let's wrap her up.
All right. So listeners, thanks for joining us for yet another episode of our podcast. And we hope that you found the conversation with Mike Malekoff interesting and thought-provoking. And as always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
And finally, if you enjoy the podcast, please hit that like button on your app. You know, it helps other people find us, as the more likes we get, the higher up we kind of go in those mysterious different search engines when people search for sailing podcast. So if you like it, hit the like button. It really helps us out. And if you know of someone that'd be a good guest on the show, let us know. That's it for today's episode. Hope to see you out there on the water springtime. So until next time, signing off from cold, snowy upstate New York. See you soon.
And from over here in Münster, Germany, where it's not quite as cold, but gray and rainy, thanks for listening, and look forward to seeing you, Bela, and all of our listeners next time.